Super Mario 64 transcends gaming. Super Mario 64 is a game that seemingly did all the right things at the right time. It is a game that was far ahead of its time, but in such a way that for the most part, it did not bite off more than it could chew. From fully realized 3D environments to full 3D controls, it is a game that, while obviously not without its flaws, managed to pioneer the true 3D platformer and collectathon genres, and therefore define not only an entire console, but for some of us, an entire generation of gaming. Super Mario 64 arrived on June 23, 1996 in Japan, September 29th in North America, and almost 9 whole months after initial release on March 1, 1997 in the PAL region. Depending on your region, this is preceded by a couple of key games on the Sony PlayStation, Jumping Flash and Crash Bandicoot, but more importantly, from a console which had an entire year-and-a-half head start on the N64. Jumping Flash was released for the PlayStation on April 25, 1995 in Japan, September 29th in the PAL region, and finally November 1st in North America. It is a first-person 3D action platformer. I think it is honestly a hard game to describe because it is not what you typically think of when it comes to a 3D platformer. You have a set of open, somewhat explorable environments which your job is to simply go find some objects and take out the odd enemies here and there. And being an early game for the PS1, it does have a particular look to it. Simple, sharp level geometry, basic textures, and more fog than 19th century London. To me, it can be best described as the Walker from Star Fox 2 getting its own game and the ability to jump to absurd heights. There are some great videos out there that will do a great job at giving you a comprehensive overview of the game and its 18 levels spread across 6 ports, and it is absolutely a joy to watch speedruns of. So that being said, I won't take up too much more of your time here on it, but the main thing I want to point out here is the camera. While the concept of fully realized 3D environments was on the mind of many developers in the mid-90s, that transition from 2D to 3D was a tough hill to climb, and harder for some developers and franchises than others. What Jumping Flash does here to accommodate its vision is have a shifting, dynamic first-person camera perspective and combine that with hybrid tank controls. Tank controls while on foot, and WASD strafe controls while in midair. And frankly, there was not a whole lot else you could do with the original PS1 controller, which lacked the capability of full 3D analog controls. You look forward and ahead of you while you walk around exploring the environment, but the point of the game is going to take place up in the air. When you jump, your camera angle shifts directly below you so you can see where you are going to land, where you may want to jump to next, and in some cases of how high you can get, you could see the entire level to the extent of the limitations of the fogging. The ability to make precise jumps from platform to platform was defined by a top-down camera. To me, this is basically a marriage of the ability to create full 3D environments alongside well-established gameplay concepts like Frogger and Mario. Jumping Flash achieved what it set out to do and set a bar, definitely not the bar, but obviously a bar, regarding what exploring a 3D environment with the Z-axis intact can be. Now, while Jumping Flash was receiving positive reviews almost across the board at the time, it did not necessarily take the world by storm. While I could not find exact figures, I will generalize and say that while Jumping Flash probably impressed nearly everyone that played it in its first year of existence, it did not garner the reputation I would argue it deserved, most likely because it did not have mascot power behind it. Therefore, it was not as easy to market, nor not as easy for kids to pass along on the playground, and therefore from parent to parent, and so on. Sony needed a mascot to rival Sonic and Mario. If it wanted to have a stake in the market share which Nintendo was about to recapture with the N64, Sony wanted and needed its own rendition of Sega does what Nintendo don't. And that answer was none other than Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot was released for the PS1 on September 9th, 1996 in North America, November 8th in the PAL region, and December 6th in Japan. For North America, that is 2 weeks before Super Mario 64. For Europe, nearly half a year before Mario 64. But in Japan, nearly half a year after Mario 64. This does not necessarily speak to how the legacy of either game is affected in any region, but we will use this for perspective regarding the mechanics, level design, and environments we will see between these two games that basically had synchronized development cycles, and how they relate to a special guest we will discuss toward the end of our video. Crash Bandicoot is a platformer with full 3D characters, enemies, environments, and obstacles. The difference Crash Bandicoot has versus Jumping Flash and Mario 64 is that Crash is mostly a point A to point B platformer. You are dropped into a course where you must navigate enemies and obstacles in what I would describe simply based on the principle of the goals of the levels as a 3D revisioning of the original Mario games. It took a tried and true formula and put a 3D spin on it with 90s attitude. It was as safe as it was dangerous, and the quick-hitting nature of its level design makes it addicting and makes it instantly replayable. You can consider both scores and time as incentives, and like any good game, the levels increase in sophistication and complexity as the game progresses. Much like Jumping Flash and Mario 64, it achieved what it set out to do. 3D environments, 3D assets, and, as a progression point from Jumping Flash to Crash, 3D controls. You no longer have the nuance of the hybrid tank controls in a 3D platforming open world. For the most part, Crash controls and behaves exactly how you would expect and want if you were to pick up this game for the first time in 2021. But the catch is the level design has many levels that are more so 2.5D than they are true 3D. It looked nice for the time, and the level design has aged well, but I think that is more so because it has the safer aspect of level design that I mentioned. I am not saying that Crash is objectively easier by any means. It significantly ratchets up the difficulty at various points. Even though it is mostly point A to point B platforming, it sincerely makes you work for progression. But the takeaway from all of this is that it was not an explorable, open 3D world. It checked off the boxes of refining the controls concept of Jumping Flash and vastly improved the perception of colorful 3D environments on the PS1. But in my opinion, it was partially only able to do so because of the level design. There are plenty of people out there that grew up with Crash 1, 2, and 3 on PS1 and not Super Mario 64. And those people will be able to tell you a more intricate story about the significance of Crash Bandicoot to them. But I am merely using Crash as a stepping stone to be able to relay the significance of Super Mario 64's emergence at this time in gaming. It's September 29th, 1996. Crash Bandicoot has been making the rounds with strong launch numbers and consistent review scores in 8s, 9s, and 10s out of 10 on a console that has been out for a little over a year in North America and almost 2 whole years in Japan. The PlayStation is staking its claim as the cool console for more serious gamers and the more mature crowd, while Nintendo is slowly being labeled as a more kid-friendly console with its continued stream of Super Nintendo releases, with Sony's 32-bit machine becoming the home for grittier titles like Resident Evil, and Sega busy doing what Nintendo don't with 90s attitude. Nintendo had slowly but surely gone from the untouchable number one and identity of the gaming industry to a maker of kids games. But Nintendo is ready to unleash its high-powered 64-bit machine on North America and show that its quality visuals and ingenuity can overcome the perception of being a kid's toy and prove what Project Reality was capable of. Super Mario 64 and the Nintendo 64 went on to sell 1.5 million units in its first 11 weeks in North America. Super Mario 64's sharp visuals and incredibly creative gameplay set it apart from the competition, even if the sales figures of the Nintendo 64 versus the PS1 did not. Again, the disparity in release dates of the PS1 compared to the N64 make it difficult to look at it as a one-to-one console war like we had between, say, the PS3, 360, and Wii, for example, but the PS1 did objectively outsell the N64 around a ratio of 3-1. Now, I think we've talked enough about the climate surrounding the release of Mario 64, so let's talk about the game itself. You are greeted by the voice of Charles Martinet in what is one of the most iconic moments in gaming history.
It's me, Mario!
Then the 3D head of Mario jumps onto your screen telling you hello and proceeds to introduce you to the initial power of the N64. Mario is just so animated here, so playful, full of life as he watches the stars zoom around the screen. This was obviously a very intentional intro devised by Nintendo to show a detail and range of motion and emotion for Mario, and most importantly, this was Mario. and still is Mario. The visual branding of Mario had been relatively inconsistent throughout the 10 years prior to Super Mario 64, not necessarily in a negative way, but when you have box art coming from multiple artists in the whole Super Mario Bros. 2 / Doki Doki Panic thing, and even the licensed game like Mario's Time Machine, what it visually meant for Mario to be Mario back then was kind of up in the air. But this Mario is what Mario would look like forever and always. Obviously, with each generation we get a more improved, more proportioned Mario, but they all consistently hold on to the fundamentals of this design. Next, we move along to the file select screen. The music here genuinely captures the mood. Happy, upbeat, but somehow still uncertain. The quality of the sound is also surprisingly good for 1996 and 64. It is obviously understandable that Nintendo would have been able to achieve a better quality here, given they, at the time anyway, knew the N64 hardware better than anyone. And I'm saying this in the context of there being some early N64 titles out there with just abysmal sound quality. So select your file and off we go. The anticipation building here for those playing for the first time or even seeing for the first time would have your heart racing. This was 1996. We did not have YouTube, and video games were not as widely advertised on typical network TV as they are today. The most gameplay you would usually see ahead of time would be if your local Walmart, Toys R Us, or Kmart, yes, Kmart, had a sizzle reel or coming soon VHS running on an endless loop in the electronics section. And then whatever screenshots you could see on the back of the box. And on that note, let's get sidetracked here really quick. Video game boxes in this age were so cool and so important. Given what I just said about there not always being a means of showing off the gameplay to prospective buyers in cheap or easy ways, the box art had the job of grabbing your attention. It had to be interesting, entertaining, and creative. If it failed at that, then it was unlikely you were going to ask the store employee to unlock the case and take it out for you to look at the screenshots on the back that had the same critical job as the cover art. The cover art was the initial sales pitch, and the screenshots and blurbs on the back were the means to close the deal. And in this case, Super Mario 64 nailed it. Mario with the wing cap, the Goomba, the Boo, the penguins, Bowser on the back, Mario's reflection, Bowser breathing fire in the game. With the exception of showing off Mario's new powers a bit more, it checks off all the boxes one could have hoped for at this point. And in hindsight, you will notice how the full graphic that the box art was grabbed from is actually a lot like Super Mario Galaxy. And then there is, of course, the infamous Super Mario 128 demo. We will get to Super Mario Galaxy later on in the series, but I just think it's so neat that Super Mario Galaxy could have been conceptualized by Miyamoto or someone at Nintendo as early as this point in Mario's history. Anywho, let's start a new game, shall we? You get a quick voiceover and visual of Princess Peach inviting Mario to the castle, and thus the reason for our visit.
Dear Mario, please come to the castle. I have baked a cake for you. Yours truly, Princess Toadstool. Peach.
We then immediately have the concept of a camera in an open 3D environment, contextualized by the Lakitu flying around and showing off this bright, colorful environment. And then we meet the man himself. A warp pipe rises up out of the ground, and there he is. Breathing, blinking, looking alive, and after a brief talk with Lakitu, we finally get to take over. After what was probably 1 to 2 minutes but felt like an hour, you get to take over. You are dropped in this open space where you have the choice to explore, run, jump, dive, kick, climb, swim, or do you just go straight inside the castle? This was the question Nintendo let players answer for themselves. Someone could get a handle on almost every mechanic that was not a power-up before they even played the first level. Heck, if you climbed the right tree, you would even nab yourself your first one-up mushroom with enough exploration. The world was your oyster, but you would have to enter the castle eventually. You are then met with your first imposition from Bowser himself. He laughs at you and taunts you menacingly. His motif chimes in for the first of several instances throughout your first playthrough. And looky there, it's Toad. Toad did not quite have his Captain Toad levels of charm yet, but who else did you have to talk to? You roam around the floor and maybe even attempt to enter the basement. The walls and floors of the castle interior embrace the same warm, happy, colorful mood as the outside of the castle. But eventually you'll have no choice but to enter the room with the painting entrance to bob-omb Battlefield. The reoccurring theme here is that Mario 64 does not consistently restrict or force your movement or exploration, but it will limit your progression through the castle through various star requirements to move on to the preceding levels. This style of somewhat non-linear progression gating was handled very well for such a young concept in gaming. Not to put the cart before the horse, but you could even argue is a little too lenient in that you could beat just a little over half the stars in the game and be ready to take on the final Bowser battle. So that being said, you jump through the painting and get a quick modernized jingle of the Super Mario intro theme in your first choice of what star to go after. It's obviously not a choice, but it immediately informs you that there is potentially a lot to do in this level, or any level. Mario acrobatically flips into action and sticks the landing. The music here is on point and fully accommodating of the atmosphere of the level.
Let's go!
It is energetic and encourages the mood of let's go explore, let's go run, and jump on everything we see. The title of this first star is fairly intuitive and inevitably points the player toward the giant mountain that towers above the level. So you run along the path, slowly climbing upwards. You see a grassy plain to explore, but are potentially deterred by a barrage of water bombs trying to block your every step. You turn back to the path and see a small set of floating platforms, realizing there was another route to your current path. A few steps later, you see the chain chomp and you try your best to dodge it. Do you just run as fast as you can? Do you slowly shimmy against the fence? If you overthink it like I did, you were afraid the low-resolution barbed wire on the fence was going to hurt you. So you ran the risk and inevitably got by the chain chomp. But you press on and are now in need of health. Previously, coins were a matter of scoring points and getting extra lives. Here we discover their context of also being a healing item. But this is only after you cross the tilting bridge that, like many things on your very first playthrough, catch you off guard. It is obviously not much of a challenge, but it is just another thing to show how things are going to work in this new 3D world. You run across the grassy plain, dodging more water bombs, and you arrive at the gate to the mountain proper. But wait, there's also a path leading under this bridge. You investigate? If so, you stroll down, or heck, why not jump down? Find a 1-up and grab a red coin, which instantly lets you know its importance via the rewarding little jingle that plays, as well as the big intrusive digits that jump into the foreground. Then you stand on the switch and proceed through the gate and eventually realize you are walking back toward the very beginning of the level. Not necessarily in a negative way, but again just to show how many interconnected paths you are in store for in this new 3D world. So you backtrack to the gate to begin your ascent up the mountain. Do you climb the sharp incline on the left, or do you just take chances amongst the rolling balls in the small gutter in front of you? We just faced with a similar choice mere seconds ago, but regardless of your choice of path to get higher and higher, you have to jump across gaps, you collect coins, you have to continuously dodge the balls rolling down the hill at you, but eventually you make it. And there he is, King Bob-omb, the first boss. You approach him in anticipation, and his first gesture is to laugh at you. Not quite as deviously as Bowser, but a taunt nonetheless. After quick monologuing from the king, the battles begin and the music intensifies. The king starts slowly marching towards you with pronounced footsteps. While this stack of 2D sprites may not seem that threatening to today's standards, it's made many a child have a deer in the headlights moment. Now, I won't overcomplicate the manner in which each of us finally realized how to defeat the king here. But some of us were 5 or 6 years old and ran around like fools, continuously getting thrown off the mountain, and some of you were the age where you were able to easily figure it out. And the king does give you a subtle hint after all whenever you speak to him initially. In previous Mario boss battles, you were tasked with any combination of going above or below the enemy, or maybe jumping on top of them. But in a traditional 2D space, there is no way to laterally travel around an enemy. This gap is immediately filled by the need to run around King bob-omb in a circle to grab him and throw him. Ultimately, the battle does come to an end, and after admitting defeat, the king explodes into a few shimmering particles and reveals your very first power star. The power star cue plays, and you can basically hear the thing sparkling. You jump up to grab it, and Mario hits you with his trademark peace sign and forever sears into your brain.
Here we go!
This would go on to be a staple of not only Mario games, but 3D platformers in general. Banjo-Kazooie has its jiggy, gulping jingle, Jak and Daxter act the fool in a variety of ways after attaining a power cell. It all started here. Mario jumps out of the painting and gives you the tally on your coins, and if you explored enough, maybe even a 1-up. But then what? Do you turn around, jump back in, and see what the cannon is all about? Do you go find a 1-star door and see what else is on offer? This is part of what made Super Mario 64 such joy to get invested with on your first playthrough. Getting stuck was nearly impossible with the sheer variety of options you had to pursue for progression. There is reasonable progression gating based on stars and then a couple of hard stops, at which point Bowser must be defeated to unlock one of the doors that are locked via a key instead of star power. We could talk through all the potential paths and the math therein, but I'll leave that to the expert over at Swanky Box. If you have not seen any of what his videos of Super Mario 64, I highly recommend you give them a look. After we wrap up here, of course. Next up is Womp's Fortress. I've always thought that the immediate repetition of the level theme was a big mistake, but that can be lessened by the fact that you could have easily gone to Cool Mountain or Jolly Roger Bay next and not Womp's Fortress. But in any case, I think it's unfortunate that any of the initial levels on the first floor here share the same theme music. This level embraces the concept of climbing the mountain on bob-omb Battlefield and takes it up a notch or 12. You have steeper paths, obstacles that can push you off the edge, crush you, or even bite you. There are multiple opportunities to fall off, causing you to restart your climb, or even points which you could fall off the level completely. Eventually, you'll reach your goal and fight another boss in the Womp King, but this time you'll have a different means of defeating him via not-so-subtle X marks on his back. After the boss battle, your next missions will add some geometry to the level, and even have you flying around via hanging onto a bird. You even have to use the cannon to destroy a piece of the level to reveal a star, or overshoot it and fly off to your death, whichever. I have to soapbox here really quick, but I have heard so many people complain that this star and the cannon aspect, just climb up on top of the wall and hop down. It may take you a couple of tries to line it up correctly, but at least you won't die in the process. The layout of the level design intentionally gives you that opportunity, so I don't talk this up to being a design flaw. Next up is Jolly Roger Bay. This level starts a short trend of trope levels in Mario 64. This world is obviously dominated by water, but what stands out is it's not a sunny or tropical setting like we would see in Banjo, Spyro, or Croc in years to come. It's a damp, dreary, and moody level. The music perfectly captures the atmosphere. This level moves at an undeniably slower pace than the previous two levels, so it is fitting that the music does the same. It soothes you while you slowly make your way from the shallows to the deep waters on the far side of the map. You raise the sunken ship, you explore the cave, a little more red coin hunting, and another use of the cannon. It is a small level with fairly short and concise goals, but it's all slowed down by the water. And dare I say, none of that works if the music does not match perfectly. You are being forced to slow down, and after all the jumping, flipping, climbing, and so on, and the music puts you at ease to do so. Onward to Cool Mountain. The music picks back up and gets back into the mood to explore another fast-paced, open environment. This level introduces multiple concepts, and it has a new trope in the snow/ice level. It has a bigger slide than the Castle Secret slide, if you hadn't made your way there yet, which ratchets up the difficulty of the racing challenge compared to what we had seen in bob-omb Battlefield. It has spindrifts that make Mario briefly fly and spin through the air, Mr. Blizzards that can be melted by running around them in a circle, again making the enemy's weakness pertinent to being in a 3D environment. Point A to point B, package delivery with Lost Penguin. There's teleportation at either end of the broken bridge, which was indeed present in the previous stages, but less obvious. So I would argue you are more likely to discover it for the first time on this stage. You can ride the tram to a treacherous jump to speak to the bob-omb and get the cannon open. Then you have to either jump back onto the tram on its next pass or try to long jump down to the lower level so you can attempt the cannon shot. That is then either a chance at a star or an instant death. There are no mulligans on this one, and most of all, this whole level is in the context of descending down a mountain slope instead of climbing up one. Now to clean up the rest of the first floor. You have the castle secret slide, and who knows how long it would take you to find out there is an additional star for reaching the finish line in a certain amount of time. Then we have the bright ray of light shining down from the ceiling. This of course gets your attention and entices you to look upward. You are now transported to a level via something other than a painting, and you find yourself soaring through the air. While I was never a fan of the controls and didn't think they were great by any means, this is where I will briefly circle back to the speedrunning crowd. It is possible to be precise with these controls. People can do it, and it is out there for all the world to see. I am just not one of those people who has a problem admitting when they just may not ever be great at a particular aspect of the game, and that is fine. I can eventually take care of the 8 red coins up here, usually after 3 or 4 tries, and we will talk about the other castle secret stars up in the sky later on. So you take care of the red cap switch and then have a reason to return to bob-omb Battlefield, unless you stubbornly handled Mario Wings to the Sky exclusively via the cannon, which is possible. Then there is the Castle Aquarium. I love this level. I love the color palette outside the windows, and I think the music obviously fits, again, because water. But say you went back to back from Jolly Roger Bay to this, since they're in the same room. Again with the repetition of the music in too short of a span. But overall, I just love the vibe this level puts off. It just feels so isolated from the rest of the castle. And I just think about the really unique color of the clouds out the windows. Just always made me curious as a kid just where the heck this is in the actual layout of the castle. Even if it's not realistically anywhere. Now, you may very well have taken a shot at Bowser in the Dark World well between any of the first floor stages that we just discussed, or even between the secret stars. But we are just keeping up mostly with the chronological order of the stages here for the sake of. Everyone remembers walking through the door and seeing Peach's face slowly transition to Bowser for the first time. You knew things were about to change, and sure enough, the floor drops out from underneath you and leaves you unable to escape from inevitably having to face Bowser. The music is darker, more intense, and foreboding, and Bowser laughs at you yet again. You make your way through the most treacherous obstacle course you have been through yet, and the music keeps building and building towards the big showdown. To me, it just makes you feel like the momentum of all the stars you've been obtaining is being pulled away. Like as the music builds, Bowser is slowly taking back control over the whole situation and draining Mario and the player of all their achievements. Now you might pursue the 8 red coins, or you may just focus on reaching the end. Either way, you'll reach the warp pipe eventually. The camera pans up from Bowser's feet to his head, just revealing how large he is in this new 3D world compared to Mario. You can obviously compare the size of the sprites in the previous games, but none of those really put into perspective like the first time you ever see Bowser in all his massive, angry awfulness. The strategy here starts out the same. You run around the boss until you can grab him. Then you notice instead of walking around carrying him like you could with King Laban, you can now spin Bowser and release him in any direction. You toss him off the edge and wait for the rewarding jingle to let you know you've beaten the odds. But then you'll see the great King Koopa leap back up onto the battlefield with a roar. And now he's breathing fire at you? Now this situation is either drawn out or quickly rectified in the same way King Bob-omb was. A 6-year-old is going to keep throwing Bowser aimlessly, while a more experienced, rational gamer is going to notice the spike balls on the edge of the stage. In either case, Bowser gets got and whisks himself away in a classic cowardly fashion. And instead of a star, we get a key. Now the door at the top of the stairs would jump out as the next logical choice, but the key doesn't work. You are then forced to head downstairs, but before you do, you notice the Big Boo grinning at you down the hall. This is all a great example of the game letting you explore to your heart's content, but then ultimately guiding you to where it wants you to go next chronologically. You make chase and exit to the back courtyard where you see several Boos. But where is the Boo? Find it, and you take it out. If you get remotely close to the cage-like object it was holding, you get sucked in. This level cranks up the atmosphere. For whatever reason, you have basically been shrunken and dropped into a cage. The sky is almost black, there are legitimate bars keeping you from escaping, and the blades of grass tower over you more like trees. It's dark, the wind is howling, and the music, while somewhat upbeat, still has a creepy, ominous tone that will not let you get comfortable. Flying chairs, man-eating piano, books with teeth, giant boobs, giant eyeballs, and an interconnected multi-story level where you can accidentally fall down and end up in another room versus falling off the stage. This world has so many unique things to offer, and it is always one of my favorite stops on any playthrough. It does continue the trend of establishing tropes that most all 3D platformers embraced, this case obviously being some sort of spooky horror stage. I feel like most platformers tended to embrace more of a specifically gothic horror vibe, so I've always felt like Mario 64 managed to make this one more unique levels overall with respect to both the game and the genre as a whole. Now we finally move on to the basement proper via the locked door at the bottom of the stairs. It is so satisfying and charming seeing Mario go through the motions of unlocking the door. Having to jump to insert and turn the key, it all just flows so well, and just has a Disney-like charm to it. As you emerge through the double doors, the castle interior immediately has a change of mood. Gone are the clouds and blue skies of the wall and the ceiling on the first floor. We're looking at solid, boring brick and dark, dank metal. Not necessarily in a foreboding or remotely scary way, but it is an isolated feeling nonetheless to me. No more running around the open first floor. You now have the tight hallways with dark walls that are barely lit by torches. While the game starts off in a bright, sunny, colorful open environments, the tone of these next few levels shifts dramatically, and that trend had already started with Big Boo's Haunt. Now specifically, you could very well have enough stars at this point to go straight through to Dire Docks and Bowser in the Fire Seat. But we are just going to go through these chronologically, just for the sake of. So just keep that in mind for the next few levels, and we will most certainly circle back to Dire Docks. It's technically the 9th level, and these next 3 could be entered in pretty much any order. So that being said, on to Hazy Maze Cave. This is without a doubt my least favorite level in the game. But that does not necessarily mean it is a bad level. It was about time we got some sort of difficulty spike, and I always felt like this was it. There are pits. The means of collecting 100 coins is about as obtuse as any level other than maybe the last 2, but this level is more compact, so I always felt it was just less justifiable. Heck, you might even get your 100 coin while hanging from the bars above the rolling rock pit, and then have to do it all over again because there's no way to retrieve the star due to an invisible wall. You can suffocate in the maze, you could slip on the side of and fall down the rolling rock pit. You could be one leap away from one of the cavern stars and have to start over completely if you miss time to jump. And even the 8 red coins course in this level is just unforgiving. There are obvious ways to avoid all the fall damage, but eventually, if you fall enough times, which is likely to happen to most of us on our very first tries, you're eventually going to run out of coins for health. Overall, I think this level just always brought the game to a bit of a screeching halt for me because now the tasks are more technical and less forgiving. And they just always felt busy to me. Like, so much running from point A to point B in this level and hoping you don't die a cheap death along the way. Again, this does not make it a bad level. It is just not for me and probably never will be. However, I can at least appreciate that it does also provide the entrance to the green cap switch stage, which unlocks a star you cannot previously obtain in Jolly Roger Bay, thus keeping the cycle of encouraged exploration going, even if it is backtracking to a single star. It is entirely possible that you have handled both the red and blue cap switches to this point as well, so for one of these to be hidden inside a level, I always thought it was a good way to mix it up. And I will compliment the adaptation of the use of the underground theme from Mario 1. It is as fitting as anything could have possibly been on this level, even if I don't necessarily care for it. Onward to Lethal Lava Land. Now I won't keep harping on the whole level trope thing, so we will recap those at the end here. I love this level and honestly can't tell if it's just because I genuinely like it so much, or if it's because it was always a nice pick-me-up after completing Hazy Maze Cave. But I just enjoy how quickly and dangerously you can navigate it. While I definitely get myself into trouble and might waste several lives on the stage, I never feel like they were cheap or even frustrating. Even though I can be totally circumvented and ignored, I also appreciate the introduction of another use of 3D space and physics with the log rolling. I've heard plenty of people complain about the bully stars, and I do genuinely understand. You can almost get stun locked and it can be a bit frustrating and repetitive, but I think it's another genuinely good use of the 3D space. It's just that they maybe could have given Mario a little more power against these guys. Lethal Lava Land also adds on to the level within a level idea that we got a small dose of with the slide and Cool Mountain. Inside the volcano is a really short stint for a couple of stars, but it is really neat. I don't have a better word. It was just awesome to be dropped into this level filled with lava, not expecting to actually get to go into a volcano, but wouldn't you know, Nintendo thought of that too. Lastly, I'll say that the music in this level is very fitting. It just sounds hot. I don't know how I can explain that, but with it only being associated with Lethal Lava Land and Shifting Sand Land, it does get associated with lava in a desert, so you know, hot. It just has this miserable, waning mood that does capture the exhaustive heat that Mario would be experiencing here. And I don't mean miserable as in like miserable to listen to or anything like that, just the actual atmosphere where Mario was in this scorching, hopeless box. Now, I don't mean to keep the mood down, but this atmosphere I'm describing obviously ties into Shifting Sandland. Quicksand pits, the bird that can steal your hat, the inconsistency of stand tall on 4 pillars and possible cheap deaths while you're on the shell, and you even have a slight mystery before arriving in that it's not a traditional painting. It's just a normal looking wall, so there is at least some anxiety or anticipation on your first playthrough waiting to see what kind of level is waiting for you. It's a treacherous place, but the Koopa shell can make your life easier. But on your very first playthrough, you will probably stumble around and die a few times and get maybe the first star or two before noticing and making use of the shell. The Red Coins challenge takes you across some instant death pits and make you fly around for half the red coins, but where this level really sets itself apart is the level within a level concept, and we just talked about in going inside the pyramid. Now, the platforming may not necessarily be all that creative, but you do get to see a few reskinned enemies and ultimately have the satisfaction of making it all the way to the top. And then there's the boss battle. This is one of the more unique boss battles in that you are forced to multitask. For the veterans of the game, it is literally as simple as 6 punches or kicks, but on your first trip, you are likely going to get shoved off the edge at least once. Overall, I think it was a creative way of changing up a boss formula that was already getting tired by using large versions of existing enemies and pounding, punching, or throwing them 3 times. While the basic idea here is still the same, it is at least provided some variety at the halfway point of the game. Let's recap a few Castle Secret stars real quick before moving on to Dire Dogs. You have Mips the Rabbit, possibly twice at this point depending how many stars you have, and then you have 8 red coins in the green cap switch stage. And I'll just spin a hypothetical here. Let's say you get swept away by the current of the water before getting the 8 red coins and take a dive out of the cave. While you might be expecting to get thrown out of the painting or the pit, however you want to put it, you might be surprised seeing Mario come flying down the waterfall on the side of the castle. This then forces you to at least swim near and hopefully recognize the grated hole in the bottom of the castle moat. You slowly make your way around the castle to get back to land and notice the rusty metal door hanging out at the bottom of the undrained moat. So again, I understand it is entirely possible that you may have already handled the pillars in the basement and drained the moat, or even swam through this area before you ever even went into the castle. But here we are with yet another example of how the game finds different ways to guide you to various optional objectives throughout the castle. So fast forward to draining the moat and circling back to that hole in the ground, which is now uncovered and ready to explore. While this is a fairly quick obstacle course, it is easy to miss a red coin or two. So the game gives you multiple 1-ups here to give you the cushion of throwing yourself into the bottomless pit so you can retry. While it may be a bit of a stretch, I'll also note that it is hilariously possible to run too fast through the cage toward the 8 red coin star and launch yourself off the side and have to retry. And unlocking another cap switch yet again gives you a reason to backtrack for 1 star at Big Boo's haunt due to the wall you needed the Vanish Cap to pass through upstairs. Let's dive into Dire Dogs. Literally, Mario comes flipping out of the sky diving into the ocean. I always like the initial entrance to this level and that you walk through the star-embedded door expecting to get your next shot at Bowser, but are promptly held up by the entrance to another level. I always thought this was one of the cooler level entrances, with it being water and not a painting. Now you're probably expecting me to complain about the music being repeated, and while yes, I am not necessarily impressed by it, I do still stand by how much the music fits the mood for these water-based levels. Now I think it fits more for Jolly Roger Bay, as you are coming off those high-flying, bright, colorful, cheerful levels, and then you are asked to take it slow and soak in the environment, and this serene music makes it enjoyable instead of just bearable. Whereas with Dire Docks, you have been involved in 3 of the slower, more meticulous levels in the game just now. Now, one of the cooler things about this level is the whole Bowser's sub concept. Bowser seriously, maybe, infiltrated the castle using a submarine. I'll elaborate on that in a few minutes, but let's go ahead and talk Bowser in the Fire Sea next. After you get the star for boarding Bowser's sub, the entrance for Dire Docks retreats and opens the way to the next bout with Bowser. Bowser in the Fire Sea kind of marries some of the obstacles you navigated in Lethal Lava Land and Bowser in the Dark World, and it is again platforming and obstacles for the sake of. It is a little longer than the previous, but I always felt like it could have been longer. It is a quality stage, and frankly I'm almost sad when it's over. But one of the most interesting things to me is the fact that it is basically a side-scrolling stage. If you ignore some of the 8 red coins, it can basically go left to right to left, and left to right again. The pole jumping is reminiscent of climbing the graded walls in some of the Super Mario World castle levels, and that it can be a level hazard, but really only if you make it so. The poles can easily be navigated in left to right or right to left fashion, but they only use the 3D space and axes if you make them do so by jumping around at the potentially incorrect angle. Now the fight here is mostly the same, and Bowser has an additional power, and he uses the level geometry against you in a neat way. He can teleport away from you when you get too close to them, and he may rock the stage around if you keep your distance for too long. While the overall strategy of the battle is not much different, if at all, it is still nice to see the battle stage changed up with good use of the 3D space. But again, inevitably, the fight runs its course, and we are rewarded with another key and another cowardly retreat from Bowser. Before we head back upstairs, let's wrap up Dire Docks. In general, this is a very compact level, and I have to think it's because Nintendo knew what it wanted to do with the Bowser sub idea, but then the rest of the level seems somewhat like filler. We have multiple swim through the rings challenge in one level, and one of those is a partial repeat of the jet stream star from Jolly Roger Bay. And then the star in the cage is a slight spin on the aforementioned star and combines the metal and vanish caps to make you walk to the bottom of the water, but also so you can slip through the cage. The 8 red coin star is at least a change up in the formula, but it's not necessarily challenging. You can see every coin and every pole, and you just have to wait, then wait, and then wait some more as you meander from coin to coin. There are plenty of puzzles like this in N64 games, especially Ocarina of Time. Take some of the block pushing puzzles. You have solved the puzzle in your head long before the speed or mechanics of the game will allow you to complete it. One more quick point from this level, then we will move on. Now that you have defeated Bowser, he has retreated in his sub, and there is an open gate which was previously closed, which the current could pull you in and through and out the level. And guess where it takes you? To the inlet of water in the castle courtyard. Now I know in the grand scheme of things this interconnected world concept doesn't necessarily mean a ton, but it was still always awesome to me as a kid that there was even more than one of these instances. And once you add Royal Raceway for Mario Kart 64 into the mix, it really does at least start to make the Mushroom Kingdom seem like an actual world rather than just a bunch of arbitrary arrangements of things to jump on simply for the sake of. Now I know that is overthinking it and putting too much stock in plot of these games, but I've just always been kind of bummed by the lack of consistency in the common appearance of certain locations and landmarks in the Mario universe not having identical structure, which I know is silly as the games speak for themselves and just does not at all detract from them, but those thoughts I had as a kid just simply can't be forgotten. Okay, so let's head up to the second floor now. We get that lovable key in the door animation for the second and final time, and this is where the endgame and flexibility thereof gets interesting. If you have gotten every star for the level up to this point, you could have as many as 75 stars. 9 levels at 7 stars apiece, and all but 2 of the castle secret stars. Assuming you talk to Toad by the stairs and on the 3rd floor as soon as you get up here, but even if not, you could still be at 73 stars, so either way. It is entirely possible on a first time playthrough that you could have missed out entirely on the endless stairs, and I think that's a shame. The endless stairs were such a cool experience as a kid that thought they could outsmart the game and run fast enough to get there. Running for 5 minutes straight, then turning around and seeing that you've only gone but a few steps up. The only experience remotely similar to this that I can think of is my first playthrough of Silent Hill 2, which has this staircase that just takes you down further and further and further beneath the town. I'm not implying the two ideas are related anyway, as one is a progression gate and the other is outright progression. In any game that I've played, there was just not anything like this other than Silent Hill 2. But in keeping with the chronological concept we've had thus far, we will move on to Snowman's Land. First, I'll mention the repetition of Cool Cool Mountain's soundtrack. But it's only the second time, and it works really well for both snow ice themed levels. This is the most compact, easiest to explore and navigate level of the remaining 6, and I think that's what I like most about it. It is literally just a square with a giant snowman in the middle, and has a nice variety in stars, with some of them being super quick and easy to nab, like the Deep Freeze sculpture, a fight with the reskin bully, and basically reskin lava mechanic with the ice should you get knocked off the edge. Then there's a simple star in a box across the pond, and all you have to do is jump on a spindrift and stick the landing. That particular star even presents you with the choice, which box. One is a star and one is a shell, so you nab the star and come back to the shell. The shell is the key to 2 of the remaining 3 stars, one of the quickest and easiest 8 red coin stars, and then a trip into the igloo. I'll soapbox really quick and say that it takes me at least 3 or 4 tries to get up to the igloo each playthrough, without having the shell disappear like I ran straight into a wall while I was trying to ride the ramp up, just like Stand Tall on 4 Pillars. But I digress. And technically speaking, the first star in the whole map is probably the most laborsome. You have to climb to the top of the snowman, but honestly I just used the cannon to shoot up to the top of the tree. Multiple ways to reach the same goal, and basically with there being no other need for the cannon in this level, I think it was built that way on purpose. The 100 coins on this level can be a bit of a chore, as it requires you to explore every area of the level, as it has the 3rd lowest coin count of all the levels at either 125 or 126 depending on your source. But like I said, overall it was one of the quickest and easiest levels to 100%, especially this late in the game. And that is a nice breath of fresh air after shifting sand land and dire docks. It's also worth mentioning the giant snowman here can blow your hat off. But on to Wet Dry World. This level has one of the more creative gimmicks in the game. The starting height of the water depends on how high you jump into the pavement, or how low you jump. Now honestly, the viability of this gimmick can be called into question when you could just jump in at the highest possible point each time and then lower it as needed from there. I feel like maybe the developers could have locked down each star to a certain starting height, but then you could cross over into padding territory, so I'll admit that I don't necessarily have a solution to my criticism of this level's gimmick. The skybox is downright spooky. It makes it feel like a long dead post-apocalyptic civilization sits outside of this level, and I don't mean any disrespect to the actual city this was a photo of. It is all just in the context of the mood of the blurry, stretched out image, the sunken town, and the use of the underground theme. The exploration of this level can be varied in differing degrees of fun depending on your preference and use of the water height. And the small, abandoned town in the caged off section of the level is one of the most interesting locations in the whole game. But past this is where I start to not necessarily lose interest with the game, but the level of how impressed I am starts to wane substantially. The shocking arrowless star is just broken. That's a strong word, so maybe we could say silly instead of broken, but there is literally no need in using the namesake of the challenge to obtain the star. You could just teleport there, or you could even just swim there, depending on the water level. Another downside to this level is once you get to the highest points of the level for, say, top of the town, the camera just flat out works against you. I don't think it's justifiable to say that the camera issues are part of the challenge. The very fiber of the game's being are not intentionally made to work against you in these types of games. And I will most certainly elaborate more on this particular aspect of the game in my overall wrap-up. The next gripe is secrets in the shallows and skies. It's understandable in that it forces you to explore every nook and cranny, with some being more obvious than others, but why? I just genuinely do not care for this star, nor the 5 secrets on Tiny Huge Island. Looking for the sake of looking in non-obvious and unsatisfying ways is not something that has aged well for me. It was a novel concept at the advent of 3D platforming and 3D gaming in general, but I just don't feel like it is something that holds up today. While I cannot confirm what order the stages were developed or planned in, it is at this point I feel like the devs were genuinely running out of ideas. And I'll even include the star in the sunken town where you need the vanish cap to pass through the cage. Just about every viable option had been used up to this point, and outside of new power-ups there's just only so much you can do. And we'll have still 4 more levels to go. So before we move on, I'll make my point real quick. There had to be so much pressure to ensure that this game was not as short as it was sweet. There are plenty of instances and padding in this game, albeit not as much as Super Mario Galaxy, but frankly some levels just don't need 6 level specific stars. But also looking at Galaxy, some levels get Daredevil stars, some don't. Some have secret stars, some don't. This balance of knowing what a level is worth and how much use can come of it was healthy. Obviously, there are way more levels as the technology and mechanics allowed, but Mario 64 just either has too many levels or too many stars per level. I'd be fine simply removing some stars or maybe a level or 2 entirely. Take the DS remake. It added a few unique character levels, but it also added new stars to existing levels. I would rather have it just removed entirely, the least intuitive or least loved stars from each level, or replace them with new non-switch stars or non-silver stars and try something else entirely. Or maybe offer the option to play the game with additional stars on top of the previously existing ones, or play with replaced stars instead so you don't alienate either crowd. All in all, I just do not thoroughly enjoy Worlds 11, 12, and 13 as much as I do the rest of the game for these reasons of repetitive and or tired ideas. Moving on to Tall Tall Mountain. We have the repeated level theme from the first 2 levels and even the same concepts as the first level. You are slowly circling around this mountain with the mission of either progressing directly to the top through a couple of different means or to getting sidetracked by a few things along the way. Now this level obviously ratchets up the intensity of that concept and removes the forgiving nature of those first 2 levels. The bomb battlefield had no death pits nor ability to fall off the edge. Womp's Fortress offered plenty of ways to fall off the edge, but most of these had a fence of some sort, so you couldn't really just outright walk off. Tall Tall Mountain, on the other hand, has so many opportunities to fall off or slide off after missing a jump, and I think it is justified at this point in the game. You could have already faced Bowser in the sky based on the total possible stars available at this point, so the increased technical difficulty in this level is a difficulty spike that does not actually hinder your progress to do anything other than 100% the game. And the devs even made it to where you don't have to climb the first third or so of the mountain in its entirety each time you fall off via the gust of wind at the edge of the stage directly behind the start. And there is a 1-up here, so they clearly understood how easily you could fall off here and give you ample opportunity to not game over. And that is as considerate and forgiving as it is creative. But you want to know the truth? I had no idea about that gust of wind until this year. Seriously, I can shamelessly admit it, so let's recap the stars here real quick. Climb to the top of the mountain 3 times, once in general, once for the waterfall and once for the monkey. 8 red coins broken up into 2 separate platforming segments, and I'll argue that the first half is where there is more room for error. So I'll appreciate the fact that you aren't really in a position of getting 6 or 7 of the 8 and then falling off the stage. Once you have the first half and safely jump back onto the main path, you are basically home free. And then you have the star on the far out mushroom, which is intended for cannon use, I guess, but can easily be long jumped to from one of the higher tiers of the island. Then I'll save the best for last. They bring back the slide mechanic after a pretty long hiatus, but there is a twist with a right and wrong path. So you'll either guess right or wrong on your first try and then come back and take over the path. Or you can jump off the edge of the mountain just above the little alcove where the side spits you out, and use the kick to carry your momentum backwards and nab the star. I won't argue whether or not the devs intended this, but I highly doubt they did. Regardless, the ability to reach the star without the slide is just another awesome way of figuring out how to use the mechanics in 3D space, and how the mechanics of Mario's momentum can be used in this game. But long story short, we have the traditional 8 red coins on a scary long jump or intensified version of Blast Away the Wall. Another slide, albeit with a twist, then climbing to the top of the level 3 times. And finally, the same soundtrack we had already heard twice before, albeit not recently at least. But see where I'm going with this? Repetition, repetition, repetition. The same ideas, just in a more difficult context. I could handle all this if it weren't for climbing the mountain 3 times. And without repeating his whole opinion, I'll just say this is another example of knowing what a level is worth and not making each level have the same number of stars. Onward's probably the most interesting level gimmick in the whole game, with Tiny Huge Island. This takes a similar concept at the painting entry of Wet Dry World having a hand in the mechanics of the level. In this case, you have 2 different versions of the level, and therefore 2 different paintings to choose from. One makes Mario huge and dwarfs all the other enemies and most of the level's platforms, and the other makes Mario, well, tiny. In this version, most of the enemies tower over Mario, and some of the platforming sections look nearly insurmountable because of the gaps and the heights are so vast. And the stage offers the ability to switch sizes via warp pipes at various points on the island. But in either case, you will be faced with the same music that was just used on Tall Tall Mountain and now for the 4th time. And yet again, we have a level that is mostly centered around climbing another mountain, albeit in a very non-linear way, and I think that gets it a pass from being just another mountain. Each size version has a few barriers here and there to keep the player from simply circling around the island and knocking out each star in quick succession. Tiny Huge Island also brings back the boss battle, but it is arguably the easiest of all 3, next to the Womp King. All you have to do is jump on Wiggler's head 3 times. No ground pound, no punch, no grab, just jump. You can simply do a run in a straight line and do a side jump once the Wiggler gets close behind you. Overall, I think this level does have too many ways to die that feel cheap, and combined with repeating the level music yet again, it's just never really been one of my favorites. And it has another 5 secret star, and you know how I feel about those. Especially on a level which has a complicated mode of travel as this one. Overall, all the stars here are repeats except for Pluck the Piranha Flowers, which only gets passed because the enemies are huge. Climb the mountain, 3-hit boss battle, 8 red coins, 5 secrets, and another race with Koopa. This race with Koopa is far less straightforward, so it almost gets a pass, but it's too frustrating to get a pass. And again, same level music, so I think this is one of those where the level gimmick was definitely worth something, but there had to be a better way to accommodate the stars here. And as far as the level music, what about slowing down the music for Tiny Mario, making it more ominous or lower in tone, and threatening like the huge enemies, and then a higher pitched, sped up version when Mario has the size advantage? I think it's a very nice idea for a level, especially in the context of making use of 3D environments, but I just think there had to be a better way to utilize it. Or maybe just make it a castle secret star overall in the castle garden. Maybe where you fight the giant piranha plants and scrap the whole level idea. Anyway, let's move on to the 3rd floor. This room is marvelous and majestic. The walls have transitioned from the bright and sunny greenery and clouds to a starry night sky. You have ascended to the top of the castle. There's the giant Tick-Tock Clock, the mountainous stairs leading to Bowser in the sky, and the holes on either side of the room that transition you to levels among the clouds as if you really have ascended into the sky. So let's start with Tick-Tock Clock. It is a mechanically sound level, and the gimmick, for me anyway, is brilliant. But here is music that we have already heard several times throughout the game. I love how there are multiple speeds at which the clock can move, or potentially even have the clock at a complete standstill, making some stars easier, and making some impossible in a given run. This level is complex platforming for the sake of complex platforming, and in the context of the level gimmick, it works so well. You could describe it as difficult, tricky, meticulous, cruel, or even unfair, but you will find someone that disagrees with any given opinion about this level. I think it was simply a great idea and it was difficult on purpose, and that is perfectly fine with it being next to last of the 15 stages. And last but certainly not least of those 15 stages is Rainbow Ride. And guess what? It has the exact same music as the last level. It had already been used several times prior to Tick-Tock Clock. And again, this level is difficult and requires precise movement and platforming for the sake of. This level has honestly spawned so many things in the Mario universe. The Rainbow Cruise in Smash Bros. Melee, the Bowser and Bowser Jr. Armadas on Super Mario Galaxy, and the new Super Mario Bros. Series. That one might be a bit of a stretch, but I'll stand by it, given the ship floating up there. And even the Cloud Top Cruise from Mario Kart 8. The ship flying up in the sky with wings instead of oars is just an iconic staple of modern Mario games. Other than the music, my only criticism of this level is the speed. You have to start from the absolute beginning for each and every run. And the first couple of carpets are just so slow after you've done them for the 10th try. Now honestly, there are plenty of ways to long jump and log kick your way through this level that, again, speedrunners can, utilize in 10 different ways, but we are thinking of this in the context of your first playthrough, and it really makes sense for you to work for those last few stars, and I can appreciate and understand that. But I do think that maybe each star could have opened up a certain starting point, or something so you just don't have to start from the same spot over and over and over as you trial and error your way through the carpet paths. But overall, I genuinely enjoy this level, and again appreciate the concept that after ascending this high up in the castle, that you have also ascended into the clouds as far as the environments and the actual levels go. Before we head to Bowser in the Sky, we have one last secret star before the 8 red coins in the Bowser course. Wings over the Rainbow is difficult. But like I mentioned earlier, of course there are those out there that can obviously handle the flying mechanics in 100% precise motions. But even outside of that, I always feel like I'm missing a triple jump or something, and it's not necessarily the difficulty that is the issue here. It's the fact that if you fall off the level, you fall down to the castle courtyard. You are literally almost as far away from the level as you could possibly be, in that you have to retread all of that distance to attempt another run. This is my only gripe with this level. Not the flying mechanics, not the general challenge. It is the walking all the way across the entire hub world with each failed attempt. It's merciless, and dare I say, it's padding. But let's move on to the final bout with Bowser. Bowser in the Sky. I'm a little disappointed the music is the same as the other 2 Bowser stages, but it is by far my favorite track in the whole game anyway, so it subjectively gets less of a knock from me personally. This obstacle course is great. The structures hardly mesh at all, and it is just platforming and obstacles for the sake of, in keeping with the last few levels. And the skybox here is just awesome. It sets the tone so well. It's moody and unique, and that's why I wish the music could have been the same. There are many opportunities to fall down on your way up. You can almost always find a way to land on part of the level geometry below that you've already traversed. And there is a health heart early on in the level you can constantly use as you're making your way back up through the first half of the level. But now the fight with Bowser here is where the game turns it up to 11. We have the same skybox, we have a green and black texture on the battlefield, and the way the colors play off of Bowser here just looks awesome. And above all else, the music. You may even have 120 stars at this point, but the music here just makes you feel like Bowser is in control, and then you're in for something different than the last 2 fights. The first thing I will point out is the shockwaves. Bowser leaps up in the air and sends 2 shockwaves screaming towards you. Now this plays out in a few different ways. It may be shockwaves and no follow-up. Bowser's jump could literally destroy part of the stage, or my personal favorite is where Bowser takes off running at you while you run around preparing for the second shockwave to reach you and try to jump over it, but ultimately get taken out by Bowser's charge. Other than the odd flame on the ground, this is the first time Bowser really attacks you in 2 ways at once. And then we have the upgraded Fire Breath. It is possible to prevent the attack from running its course by grabbing Bowser's tail before he completes the charge up, as we'll call it. But if you don't, there are a couple of blue fireballs that multiply when they hit the ground, and at least one is guaranteed to match Mario's current trajectory at the time it lands. But you will inevitably find a way to get at Bowser here, and with the final, you've done it. Just kidding. Instead of landing on his back like the previous 2 fights, Bowser comes to and gets right back up. And again. This time he dismantles the stage in a fit of rage to reveal the shape of a star. Now you have less real estate to work with in avoiding any attacks, but you are also what seems like miles away from the nearest spike. and every time you miss your target, Bowser leaps back onto the stage, sending more shockwaves at you while you have less room to dodge them. This battle makes excellent use of the 3D space with hazards, geometry, destruction, and overall difficulty curve that is extremely satisfying on your initial playthrough. Now, obviously it's not much in the way of difficulty on your 20th playthrough, but the overall atmosphere of the exchange with all the colors and higher hit count has really helped this age well. It is a fight that throws in enough wrinkles to probably take a few of your lives on your first few attempts. But like the previous encounters, Mario inevitably wins. The oversized power star you are rewarded with is so gratifying. The absolute silence beforehand lends even more of the atmosphere. You hear nothing but Mario's footsteps, leading up to one final leap to grab the star. The final score from Koji Kondo kicks in, and it just feels so triumphant. It's a tone and style that we have come to recognize over multiple N64 titles like Star Fox 64 and Ocarina of Time. The scores for all of those endings gives you that same feeling of epic triumph that you have finally overcome insurmountable odds. With a wing cap and a few jumps, Mario begins his descent from the sky back down to the castle courtyard.
Is restored to the castle. And it's all thanks to you. Thank you, Mario. We have to do something special for you.
Here we go!
Listen, everybody.
We are greeted by a few toads and the silhouette of Princess Peach slowly appearing before our eyes now that the power of the stars has been returned to the castle. After a quick exchange of words, the end credits roll, and Koji Kondo takes us on a trip through each level. The soundtrack shifts to a happy and cheerful tone with subtle shifts in mood depending on which level you're seeing. This end movie is extremely heartfelt and gratifying. Nintendo is truly showing off all the environments they lovingly crafted for Mario's 3D debut. And this could even go so far as to show you a few areas of the stars that you missed if you hadn't 100% of the game prior to defeating Bowser for the final time. It's a credit sequence, much like the aforementioned Star Fox and Zelda entries, that truly makes you feel accomplished and even appreciated for what you've done. But somehow sad that it's all over. You've just taken part in one of the most revolutionary video games ever made, which was true at the time and is still true today. And that leaves that little empty feeling in the pit of your stomach when you realize you will never again experience this game for the first time. Now, I'm not saying Super Mario 64 is a game without its flaws. It has some deep, deep flaws. Some are in the context of being a product of its time in both good and bad ways, and some are just flaws in any sense, past or present. So in closing, let's talk through some of those perceived flaws and how they either was nothing at the time to prove that Mario 64 was doing it wrong, or maybe even how some to this day are issues that persist in gaming overall. Some of the later level design can come off as repetitive or somewhat uninspired, with bland, uninteresting, or repeated environments, recycled music, and missions that have been seen multiple times prior. Is this inherently bad? Absolutely not. It may not have aged all that well from the perspective of repeat playthroughs, But again, this is leaps and bounds above what the world was expecting or even prepared for in 1996. And in comparison, Crash Bandicoot had its fair share of repetitive gameplay or level tropes, but in the context of both of these games, they were of such quality that these thoughts were probably not on the mind of anyone at the time. Any notion of repetition in a negative way would have been equivalent to someone in 1985 thinking the original Super Mario Bros. Was repetitive. Which, however true that may technically be, was not a bad thing at the time, because there was nothing else relative or comparable to its achievement yet. Therefore, there was no objective benchmark which to say this repetition concept was inherently flawed or negative. And in most respects, it is still not objectively negative to this day because it plays the way it's supposed to and is of the quality its legacy implies. Now, that last bit is a very broad term, but how long did we just spend talking about this game? You get what I mean? Now let's talk about the soundtrack. There are some Mario series staples in this game, but in my opinion there are too few tracks in the grand scheme of how many levels there are, especially if you factor in some of the secret levels. Now mind you, there are not necessarily any bad tracks here. I don't really care that much for this rendition of the Underground theme, but it's not bad. And I realized they were severely limited by the memory size of the cartridge, and that future games had bigger cartridges, so I will wholeheartedly chalk this up to a memory issue than a lack of trying or lack of effort from the imagination of Koji Kondo. He knows what he is doing and is responsible for some of the most memorable tunes in Nintendo and gaming history, so I will not pretend that he is to blame here. The sound effects and music are all of a fairly high quality, again especially for an early Nintendo 64 title, of which there are some out there with abysmal sound quality. And I can live with that. Next is the camera. When it comes to Super Mario 64, this is usually what you hear the most complaints about. And while I think the criticism is sometimes blown out of proportion, it is warranted in some areas. There are some really tight platforming areas where the camera either refuses to budge or slowly moves back to its original position after being moved, like in Wet Dry World or inside the volcano. For the sake of not just simply complaining, let me come full circle on a tangent I started near the beginning of the video. Jumping Flash had to contextualize its camera because it was from the first-person perspective. Now our special guest that I mentioned earlier has something else to offer here. Any ideas? It is none other than Bubsy 3D. Now look, there are multiple videos there that can give you a great rundown on all the shenanigans that led to and make up Bubsy 3D, like Nitro Rad or Matt McMuscle's What Happened. You should absolutely check out those videos if you have not already, as they will give you a lot of insight into this mess of a game. But I will use this game for a couple of final compare and contrasts here. While everyone picks on Bubsy 3D, and rightfully so, it did get one thing somewhat right. Not completely right, but it had the right idea, and is something that I think with a little tweaking could have greatly benefited Mario 64's already stellar legacy. And that is the dynamic camera angle when jumping. Now, I'm not necessarily saying Mario 64 should have had a camera which automatically shifted upward when jumping like in Bubsy 3D, but let's take Mario 64, Jumping Flash, and Bubsy 3D, and let's marry these camera ideas. Now let's also take that unmapped L button on the N64 controller. What if L let you toggle the camera to an overhead angle? I understand it would be difficult in some of the environments with some of the floating platforms and general overhead geometry, but take the upper sections of Wet Dry World, Tick-Tock Clock, or Rainbow Ride. That could have totally changed these segments of the game where you are almost constantly battling the camera angles. Now obviously the game is not the same genre, etc., but Star Wars Shadows of the Empire had an overhead camera option in 1996. That game had slippery, floaty handling and some platforming sections that were just unfair and exponentially more difficult were it not for the overhead camera angle. Just humor me and think about it. What could have been? Now let's use Bubsy 3D for one more useful point here. These barren, ugly 3D textures you see, or lack of textures, is what the idea of moving from 2D to 3D look like to some. It is not crazy to think that there were other devs out there with similar ideas, but those devs obviously had the foresight to realize the Bubsy 3Ds of the world were not good enough to make the transition to 3D yet. I know there were also many other casualties or flops in the leap from 2D to 3D, but that is yet another conversation for another day. And when you compare that to Naughty Dog's Crash Bandicoot and just how much better it looked, played, and felt on the same console, in near identical dev cycle as Bubsy 3D, and then line that up against the Super Mario 64, which again, an almost synchronized dev cycle and just all the things they were able to achieve with basically no competition to cheat off of, for lack of a better term. And yes, I understand the difference in hardware power as well. Now, I'm not saying that future platformers quote-unquote cheated off of Mario 64 in every case, but just to put it into perspective, that Mario 64 was almost certainly the template for which most open-world 3D games, platformer or otherwise, were based on in some way, shape, or form for the next several years. Whether it be Ocarina of Time, Banjo-Kazooie, or even Spyro, Mario 64 set a bar that everyone wanted to reach in various ways. Visuals, mechanics, level geometry, or environments in general, level tropes. Various games improved on these formulas. Some tried too hard, and some still use a few of the general concepts to this very day. We can argue later about which games objectively exceed Super Mario 64 in these areas, but that is another conversation for another day. This is all just supposed to be a retrospective look at what Mario 64 meant to the gaming world at the time, and how some of those hold up to this day. Now let's briefly touch on the completion bonus. This idea was novel back in the day, and we'll also call it cute or neat, but it does not add much to the game in my opinion. I just achieved 120 stars, completed the hardest stars the game has to offer, and lost all the lives I'm going to lose in the process. Why would I then need 100 lives? Only after all the game over screens and time lost climbing back from the first floor to the third floor to the basement, what is the point? Other than the novelty of seeing a full-size 3D Yoshi for the first time, a full-size 3D Yoshi which die-hard fans were probably hoping to ride around the castle courtyard or have one final challenge that somehow involved Yoshi, nope. He just jumps off the castle and disappears, albeit with a genuinely thankful and satisfying note from the developers that does communicate the whole point of the lives. This was fun as a kid, but it just has not aged well for me. I will say I get the idea of having all these lives and then setting off to go reattempt stars in dangerous or creative ways. The shiny triple jump is cosmetically pleasing, I guess. It is classic Mario charm. Then it's not particularly exciting. But I get it that it can add some creativity to replaying various stars. Lastly, there's the oversized penguin at the Cool Mountain slide. And this was hilarious to me as a kid, and still is. Just trying to get around this guy or keep him from passing you is hilariously fun and entertaining. Now last but most certainly not least are the movement and physics. I wanted to be sure to end on a high note here. Just how free and flexible Mario is here cannot be understated. Sliding, running, jumping, crawling, diving, flying, breakdancing, swimming, flipping, sleeping, you name it. Mario can move in just about any direction at any time. The sheer vastness of moves and animations that Nintendo were able to fit in here is just absurd. And again, on the first try. Thinking of how many other franchises that had to hone their craft over time once they made the transition to 3D, pretty much every Mario game after this uses the majority of the context of how Mario controls with only slight variations in between and outside of general power-ups. Or think of how many N64 games after this have the basic button mapping of Mario 64 in play. A to jump, B to punch or kick, Z to crouch or ground pound, C buttons for camera. Most platformers stick to some or all of these. And in Mario 64's case, it just feels right. Not too heavy, not too floaty. Mario skids when you expect him to skid. He usually turns when you expect him to turn. And rarely, if ever, does this game make you feel like you hit the right buttons and the game did not respond accordingly, Skyward Sword style. Almost never, and probably only in the tighter sections of the later levels, and realistically, it was probably just you and you got through it eventually. Now in closing, I fully understand that I'm not saying things that nobody has ever said before about Super Mario 64. But it is frankly a game whose influence can never be understated. And in recent years, and even with the release of Super Mario 3D All-Stars, it is being slowly but surely less and less appreciated outside of the core N64 or Mario crowd. And that's a shame. So much of today's ambition or yesterday's childhood memories rest on what this game accomplished. And it is something that any and every gamer should be thankful for or conscious of.
Thank you so much for to playing my game.